That's fine. I can close this. Technical difficulties, I'm sorry about that one. So we are a pretty distributed team, literally distributed all across the globe. So this is not my sole work. I'm presenting this on behalf of the team. So Patrick, on the extreme left, he started the diffusers project. He's currently based in Paris. Then we have William, who is based in currently San Francisco. Then we have EE. She is based out of Hawaii. Then we have Pedro, based out of Spain. Then we have Suraj, again an Indian, but currently he's based out of Paris. Then we have our new joinee Dhruv, who is based out of Bangalore from India. So as you can see, time zones are very distributed, and I'm also based out of India. So yeah, pretty much all across the globe. Let's see. All right, cool. So this is how I roughly wanted to approach the session, and at any point in time, you can stop me, ask questions, and we can take it from there. So I'll start by giving you a very brief intro about generative models. I'm not going to cover large language models. So as a disclaimer, because I think people often confuse large language models with generative models. They often think that generative models are only about large language models, but they clearly are not. So yeah, and I'm gonna then straight dive into diffusers. I'll discuss use cases for image generation and beyond, because lots of folks think that diffusers is just for image generation, but I'll show you it's absolutely not. So, and I'll also show you how you can train your own diffusion models on two use cases. One would be unconditional diffusion models, and another would be text condition latent space diffusion models. So yeah, let's go. So here's how I like to go about the entire space of generative image models. I think this picture pretty much captures all the architectural changes that we got to see around generative image models. And again, this does not include large language models, although I say this is generative models. So kind of started with GANs. Of course, VAEs came before GANs, but GANs pretty much started the revolution around photorealistic image generation. I think we all can agree to that. Then we have got VAE, which we will come back to in this talk in a moment. Then we have got flow-based models. I'm not sure if anyone even uses flow-based models these days. Then we have got diffusion models, which is going to be the main topic of today's talk. So yeah, again, the final disclaimer doesn't include large language models, I know. And for the next couple slides, so just to set the context clear, diffusion is a very general framework. It's not specific to images. You can extend diffusion, the process, the diffusion framework to videos, audios, and so on, and even molecule generation. So for the next couple slides, we are going to concentrate on image diffusion models. So yeah, here's how I like to think about how diffusion models work. So what happens when you try to sort of refine a noise vector to bloom it to become a realistic image? And here's an infographic for you. We are basically starting off with a random noise vector drawn from a Gaussian, and then we are sort of trying to iteratively progress that into a realistic image. And here's a bit more informative infographic. And you can see it's not a one-shot process, it's an iterative process where we sort of gradually denoise a random noise vector so that it becomes a realistic image. And as deep learning researchers, we like to throw conditions at pretty much everything that we deal with. Now, when we try to condition the denoising process with natural language, it becomes something like this. I should have updated the slides to DALI 3 results, but yeah, there we go. And I hope we all can agree that in reality, these things cannot really exist. But somehow systems like diffusion, they can associate different contexts present in the natural language prompt, and they can come up with creative generations like this. Yeah, I mean, white far monster, this cannot really exist in reality. So yeah, but this is again Oxford, land of Harry Potter. I'm not even sure. So yeah, I think it's also important to talk a bit about the literature here, because the path to diffusion models, it has been a long road, I think, because as you can see, 2015 was the year when someone applied diffusion models in the deep learning context, and then it was kind of absent for about 5 years. And in 2020, someone from Peter Abel's lab showed this paper to arXiv. denoising, diffusion, probabilistic models, and then it sort of started kicking off. So it's been a long road, but nevertheless an interesting one, because I think GANs are going to meet doomsday soon. So yeah. And let's talk about some popular diffusion models. We have got DALI 2, DALI 3. I should have updated again. Then we have got Stable Diffusion XL. Then we have got Imagen. We have got Deep Floyd Ziff, not the Rudyard Kipling poem. We have got Kandinsky, and then we have got Roshan. These are like pre-trained state-of-the-art models. But there are, of course, other text-to-image models such as Muse, Party, and so on, but they are not based on the diffusion framework. So that's why I have not included them here. And then not all these models are open access or open source. For example, DALI 3, DALI 2 are clearly not. Google's Imagen, it's also not open source, but some of them are. So yeah. And I like to also answer this question collectively on behalf of Hugging Face. Why make them open in the first place? Because we want to be able to study the risk factor, the safety factors, but at the same time, we want to build on the shoulders of the giants. But if the giants prefer to, keep their shoulders private, we won't be able to build on top of them. But at the end of the day, we want to improve these models, right? That's why it's very important to have open source code and open checkpoints so that researchers and practitioners can benefit from them and eventually improve them. So yeah, I think this is a good opportunity for me to introduce diffusers. But before I do so, I just wanted to know if there are any questions on Zoom or from the in-house audience. Cool. 1, 2, 3. All right, cool. So again, it's a open source Python framework, primarily maintained at Hugging Face, where we have got two objectives. We want to be able to provide open and responsible access to state-of-the-art pre-trained models, but we also want to democratize the ecosystem around diffusion models by providing simple and intuitive APIs for researchers and practitioners to take advantage from. And I'll come to the second point in a moment. And for the rest of my talk, I'll try to focus on the second point as much as possible. So let's see how. So when I say we want to democratize the ecosystem around diffusion models by making them as easy to use as possible, I essentially mean something like this. In order to generate an image like this, you would basically start from a natural language prompt, and you would want to generate an image like this in seconds. So in 5 lines of code, it's possible, but of course, I'll show you how you can go deeper and customize your things to the greatest level of details as possible. So yeah, if you have used transformers before, I hope the APIs look extremely familiar, because from pre-trained API, we follow similar kinds of philosophy, but there are subtle differences which are not important in the context of this talk. So we basically initialize a pre-trained checkpoint, which comes from Runway, and then we initialize the stable diffusion pipeline. Then we do the device displacement, and then we call it on a prompt. Since I care about code cleanliness and indentation, I formatted my code like this, but if you are clever, probably you could express it in 2 lines. So yeah, I mean, we do not even need the safe step if you do not want it. So yeah, about 5 lines of code, and that's all you need to get from a natural language prompt to a realistic looking image. So yeah, do we have a question? What was that prompt for? Are we good? Cool. All right. You also might argue that this is not photorealistic enough. And if you are wondering about that point, well, we have got other models that can give you the kind of, mid-journey kind of edge that you are looking for. So we have got Kandinsky, another pipeline, which is not exactly a stable diffusion pipeline, but similar to how stable diffusion works. It also kind of follows the close philosophy of DALI 2, which basically uses a prior pipeline to predict the image embeddings, which gets additionally conditioned into the diffusion process. So yeah, if you are looking for extreme and hyper photorealism, then Kandinsky is probably your jam. So that's it. Again, I also would like to highlight on the easy and intuitive API part. You can see it's all from pre-trained, and then just about a few calls of calling your pipelines on prompts. So far, for the next couple of minutes, we'll focus solely on the inference part, so that you can get accustomed to how to use these diffusion models to generate cool images for various use cases and also videos and so on. But we'll also get to the more fun stuff where you get to sort of customize your own diffusion models, train them, and understand their training dynamics and progress. So yeah, and the latest, the newest kid on the block is Stable Diffusion XL, which basically introduces two components. One is the base component and one is the refiner component. With refiner, it basically helps you to add mid-journey like edge, the fantasy landscape like edges. So with refiner, that's possible. So if you are even looking for mid-journey like quality but for free, then Stable Diffusion XL is probably your jam. But then again, Stable Diffusion XL is also one of the largest open access diffusion text to image diffusion models that are out there. So if you are computationally constrained, then there are some challenges, but nonetheless, Stable Diffusion XL's quality is amazing. So yeah. And I wanted to also talk about this particular use case because I think it has got a lot of practical value. Let's say you want to generate variations of a particular, I don't know, product image. If you are working on the e-commerce domain, then pipelines like this can be extremely valuable because you can generate variations of an input image. Additionally, you can condition the generation process on a natural language prompt. So that's there. And again, the APIs should look extremely simple. They should feel very natural and at the same time very intuitive in the first place. So yeah. And text to video. Well, videos are nothing but an added dimension on top of 2D images, like that you just add the time axis so that it becomes spatio-temporally coherent. But in reality, their architectures, the dataset compositions, they are way more difficult to even think about and approach. But let's say you want to generate a video from natural language with natural language supervision. All you need, again, 5 lines of code. You initialize your pipeline, you do the device displacement, and you call your pipeline on a prompt. Let's say I'm making Darth Vader serve a wave, and voila. You basically get spatio-temporally coherent frames, which you then export to a video. So that's also possible. It's, as you can see, we are not doing any optical warping or stuff like that. All of the stuff is basically taken care of by you. So I'll also introduce another pipeline which basically lets you extend your 2D text to image pipelines to become 3D ones, because for these pipelines you actually need to pre-train them on video caption pairs, which is again extremely computationally intensive. So yeah, not everyone has the computational firepower to do that. So it would be amazing to have pipelines that basically let you to extend 2D image pipelines to become video ones. So I'll talk about that as well. But yeah, let's continue. Now, the reason why I wanted to focus on control nets is because so far the kind of pipelines that we have discussed, they only let you control the text aspect, because the generation process is only conditioned on the text aspect, and in some cases, like for example, image variation is also conditioned on the input image. But let's say you also wanted to introduce additional conditions. For example, let's say alongside your text prompt, you also want some kind of pose image, so that the generated image actually not only adheres to the natural language prompt, but also it kind of follows the pose that you want to see in the generated image. Or let's say any canny edge map filter, or let's say segmentation map, depth map, and so on. So basically, you want to condition the generation process not only on natural language input, but also additional forms of modalities as well. And control nets basically let you do that. It's nothing but a residual auxiliary network which computes embeddings. And while doing the generation process, you basically condition the generation process with the embeddings computed from a control net model. And the results are actually pretty cool. Again, the code is probably not very important here, but since I wanted to make a point, it's again, the APIs are very simple. And here I'm going to try to make Darth Vader dance in a desert. So let's see how that looks like. So now we have got a prompt, Darth Vader dancing in a desert. And we also have got a pose conditioning image, because I want to have the generated image, look like this pose. So that's also possible because this is extremely controllable and this is extremely flexible, which is probably not something that we get with models like GANs and VAs and so on. So this is where probably the primary advantage of diffusion models comes into the picture. They are extremely controllable. They're extremely flexible. If you want to introduce any minor changes to do things like this, it's extremely easy to do so. So yeah, and you can, instead of a pose image, you can use anything like canny filters, segmentation maps, depth maps, even sketches, and so on. So yeah, and you can, the better thing is you can actually combine multiple of these conditions. Like for example, you have got a text prompt, then you have got a canny edge filter of a mountain, and then you have got a pose, and you get something like this. So the flexibility to combine multiple such image conditions along with a natural language prompt, I think it's pretty phenomenal. It's also very creative at the same time. So yeah, and I was talking about previously, I was talking about extending 2D text to image pipelines to become 3D image ones. Now we are gonna see how. So I'm gonna even try to make Darth Vader dance a little bit better than the previous one. So we have got a pose video, and we have got the same language prompt that we saw, and we have got a better version of Darth Vader dancing in an image, dancing in a desert. So this one, it's called text to video 0, which gives you the ability to extend your favorite text to 2D text to image pipelines so that they become text to video ones. But there's one limitation currently. It's not possible to generate coherent, video frames, which are like longer than 10 seconds in terms of sequence length. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good step forward. We can work that one out, I think, pretty soon. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good step forward indeed, because it essentially cuts down the computational complexity and computational requirements of pre-training large text-to-video models. Because the vanilla text-to-video models that we saw, it requires you to sort of pre-train on large, corpuses of video caption pairs, which is in the first place very expensive to, acquire, and then comes the training part. So very expensive process, and I truly think this is a very good step forward. Cool. Any questions from anyone? Zoom or in-house questions?
You have mentioned you have used the sentence to generate the video or image.
Yeah.
When you have the sentence, do you have any specific template to match the sentence? Because if you write the long sentence,
yeah, that's another limitation. So if you have got too many components which the underlying model needs to associate together, then it might fail miserably. It's actually a phenomenon that's typically seen in diffusion models. It's called catastrophic neglect. When you have multiple component objects present in your prompt, it tends to weigh some of the objects higher than the other ones. It's called catastrophic neglect, and you can mitigate these issues by using something called prompt weighting, where you want to see more of this particular component object than the rest of them. So, but if you go ahead.
And for your data set, like the image, video, and everything, when you train the model, where is your source come from? The image. And
so this is just a 2D text to image pipeline extended to become a text to video one. You do not need to actually train on video for this one.
But so when you train the model, you don't need any image data set like the huge.
Yeah, of course. The underlying text to image pipeline, it needs to be first pre-trained on a huge text to image data set, like an image caption pairs data set, basically. Otherwise, it won't be able to generalize to multiple different concepts that we see in the day-to-day life.
Which data set do you use?
The most popular one is the Lion 5B, 5 billion data set. But Stable Diffusion XL was even pre-trained on a larger data set. And I forgot to mention during my introduction, I'm also working on two interesting research problems. One is holistic evaluation of text to image models, because I think LLMs have got a pretty good evaluation harness suite. From Elither AI, we have got our own open LLM leaderboard. So I'm desperate for a very holistic evaluation of text to image models. I'm also working on studying how data scale and data quality impacts the downstream performance. So if you do not have access to such large data sets such as Lion 5 billion or the ones which were used to train on Stable Diffusion XL, then hopefully our study will become useful. Yeah, but for Stable Diffusion XL, long story cut short, we do not know the kind of data sets that were used. But the closest that we have is Lion 5 billion. It's a pretty huge one. Cool. So with Stable Diffusion XL's release at Hugging Face, we have been training a lot of internal models, and we have already released them. So we have got ControlNet, Stable Diffusion XL. We have released checkpoints for Kandinsky conditioning. We have got checkpoints for Dept conditioning and so on. Then we have got T2I adapters, which are basically similar in concept, conceptually similar to control nets, but they are faster to execute, but at the same time, they are also smaller in size. So, and we have got our own impending pipeline as well. All of these things collectively unlock a number of different creative use cases. So I highly encourage you all to check it out if you are interested. Yeah. And of course, if you are really dealing with practically viable use cases, maybe you want to generate novel logos for brands and so on, then you would of course need a model that can scale characters well in the generated images. But the models that we have discussed so far, for example, Stable Diffusion XL, Kandinsky, and so on, they are not well equipped to generate character content in the image renditions. So we have got diffusers, again, not the Rudyard Kipling poem. If is actually capable of generating images with a lot of character content present inside of it. And I think it again unlocks a plethora of really practically important use cases. Let's say, as I mentioned, if you wanted to generate cool logos for brands, probably diffusers if will be the way to go. But here's the caveat: if is also extremely computationally expensive to run, because the entire if system in full precision, it's 43.2 GB, and there's no way in this earth you could run such a system on a free tier Collab notebook instance, which comes with a 16 GB VRAM GPU. So the point I wanted to make here is we have got enough engineering cavalry for you to sort of experiment with this, because with diffusers, with the right argument set, you can actually run a pipeline as heavy as diffusers on a free tier Collab notebook instance and experiment with this as seamlessly as possible. So the idea there is we make use of course, mixed precision. We make use of pre-computing of the text embeddings. I'll get to why pre-computing the text embedding part is very important, and we make use of 8-bit quantization with bits and biases. So yeah. And the reason why, let's also discuss why if is particularly good at generating text content. And that's because of the use of a more powerful text encoder. So Stable Diffusion XL, Stable Diffusion, and Kandinsky, they all use CLIP, which is a contrastive model. It's not a dedicated text encoding model or even a sequence to sequence model in the first place. But diffusers, taking inspiration from Google's Imagine work, it uses T5 as its text encoder, which is again a very seminal work in the grounds of NLP. I hope you can agree to that. It's like a dedicated sequence to sequence model, and that's exactly where diffusers if kind of gets its firepower for generating better text content in the images. But it also works on the pixel space. So Stable Diffusion XL, they all work on latent space. Instead of directly generating the pixel space images, it basically generates the latents, and then we feed those latents off to a variational autoencoder, and then we get our image out. And why variational autoencoder? Because to take advantage of all the good stuff that variational autoencoders come with, high fidelity, lots of diversity, and so on. So I hope that kind of intuitively gives you an idea of why diffusers is particularly good at generating text content in images. And 3D, if you are working with 3D, we have got support for OpenAISJP as well. again, the APIs are very similar. You initialize it, you call the pipeline on a natural language prompt, and voila. So with Shapey, we have got some interesting stuff going on. We basically predict the 3D function, which you can then feed off to your favorite renderers, such as NARF, and then you can get the final asset out. So that's how we have designed our 3D pipeline. And I welcome you to check it out because it's still in its infancy. It's not very matured. We are always looking for feedback for this. So, yeah. I think now is a good time for me to also highlight some of the design decisions that we have had to make while we were initially developing diffusers. If you work with the code base of diffusers, if you feel like some bits are off, well, probably it's intentionally it's there on purpose. For example, we focus on usability over performance. So if you feel like this bit of code could have been optimized even further, probably there's a reason why we wanted to behave like that, because we wanted to focus more on the usability side. We want to be simple over easy, and we want to provide you with tooling so that you can go ahead and customize your stuff rather than giving you a number of different abstractions. Because I think abstractions introduce a lot of unneeded technical debt, and you need to learn, different disparate concepts. So we want you to sort of have fun with our library and customize things to a great extent. So, yeah. And so far, I think we talked about some text to image, text to video, text to 3D, image variation stuff, but there are all sorts of different pipelines for you to explore. And we have even other pipelines such as audio pipelines, molecule generation pipelines, and so on. So if you're interested to explore different kinds of pipelines, these are all possible. And all of these pipelines actually are subclass from a mother diffusion pipeline class. And that's because we want to promote a consistent and unified API design, so that if you have learned about the usage of a particular pipeline, you can basically extend that learning process to other pipelines. Like, for example, some common APIs will never change. If you wanted to take advantage of an efficient implementation of attention, you can basically call enable efficient attention mechanism, and it will just work right off the bat. So yeah. And I think this bit will be interesting for those of you who want to, swap out different components of a diffusion system. And I think it's also important for me to clarify something here. And remember, diffusion is not about a single model component. It's actually a system in its own kind that collates together multiple models and another component called scheduler. So for a system like stable diffusion, it has got text encoder. Of course, you can intuitively think about it to embed your text prompt. Then it has got a variational autoencoder, since it's a latent space diffusion model, which basically operates on the latent space. So for computing all the latents, it relies on a variational autoencoder. Then you have finally got your unit, which is basically responsible for the reverse diffusion process. So, and you have, of course, got the scheduler component, which is basically responsible for adding the noise to the computed latents with respect to particular time steps. So you see, you have got 4 different components to play around with, and we want you to be able to seamlessly switch between these different components. Now let's see how we can do it. So let's say you wanted to swap out the default scheduler of a diffusion system. It's as easy as just setting the scheduler component of the loaded pipeline. If you wanted to use your fine-tuned unit, it's also as easy as specifying the unit component. And if you wanted to change the variational autoencoder, let's say if you wanted to use a smaller variational autoencoder, it's again just easy as setting the variational autoencoder component. Now, I fine-tuned the unit on custom Pokemon's dataset, and I wanted to be able to generate pictures of Sundar Pichai in cute renditions, and this is how it looks like. So yeah, not bad. Yeah, there we go. All right. So let's now come to the perhaps more interesting side of the talk, where we will see how we can train our own diffusion systems. We will focus on 2 particular use cases, unconditional diffusion models and text condition latent space diffusion models. So let's see. But we have got support for different use cases. So vanilla text to image fine tuning, the stuff that we just saw, cute Sundar Pichai. We have got Dream Booth. Let's say you want to be able to generate your face in interesting contexts and interesting renditions. Dream Booth will be your way to go, which basically enables subject-driven generation. Then you have got textual inversion. For example, let's say the pre-trained diffusion system probably didn't have a particular concept learned, and you want to be able to distill that particular concept into the system. You want to be able to inject that new concept into the diffusion system, and textual inversion will be one of the ways to go about it. And then you have got custom diffusion, again similar stuff. You have got control nets. We talked about control nets. Basically enables you to induce additional forms of control, so that you have got lots of flexibility during the generation process. Then you have got T2I adapters, again works very similar to how control nets work. And then you have got instruct pix to pix, which basically lets you to edit input images with human readable edit instructions. So so let's get to the point. We want to be able to train an unconditional diffusion model, and our data set basically looks something like this. So we have got images of butterflies, and we do not have any text at this point in time. So we will basically prompt the model with a seed, which will be used to draw a random noise vector from a Gaussian, and then we'll see. So we basically want to learn this reverse process. And I took this diagram from the DDPM paper. We basically want the model to predict the noise that was added to our input image, and we will see the effectivity of the process with which we make the model learn how to predict noise. It sounds very trivial, but at the end of the day, it just works. So we'll see. So these are all the major components that you need in order to train an unconditional diffusion system. So we need a noise scheduler to be able to sort of draw a random time step and sort of sample noise, and then add that noise to our clean image. Then we need to, of course, draw noise from a Gaussian. Then we also need a time step because time steps are important, so that model is aware which phase in the diffusion process it's in, because it's an iterative process. And then we use the noise scheduler to add noise, and this is how the noise image basically looks like. And of course, we need another model which we can train. This is the model we basically train, which is responsible for predicting the noise that was added to our clean image, or let's say lesser noisy image. So we are again back to the square one. In the diffusion literature, units are still the way to go. I think they kind of died with vision transformers. Even for segmentation tasks, we use vision transformers these days. But unit is kind of the de facto in the diffusion literature. So yeah. So this is roughly how the unconditional diffusion training process looks like. And if you work with Python, then I hope we can agree that this is not pseudocode. This is actual Python code which will run. So we start with we start by drawing the noise vector from a Gaussian, and then we also sample the time steps, and then we add noise to the clean images, and then we make the model predict the noise, and then we basically compute MAC. So that's roughly how the unconditional diffusion training process looks like. And with just 10 steps of training, I've got interesting looking butterflies. So yeah, I hope again we can agree that the code is readable enough, clean enough, simple enough to understand intuitively, and so on. So these are basically some of the ways in which we are trying to democratize the literature around diffusion models, because again, with diffusion, we have got multiple components going on. So it's important for us to sort of make people understand what's the role of each of these components, and so that they can navigate across the literature as easily as possible. So yeah, any questions from Zoom or in-house? We good? Cool. Go ahead.
You support work with 3D mesh data. So basically, this is that is good money.
Yeah, no, we do not support generating such 3D functions yet. We don't. Go ahead.
Sorry, just one question.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could customize your structure, building your own.
Yeah, possible. So what you will do is we have a base scheduler class in Python where you would basically need to implement methods like step, override, and so on, and that's it. So we have got about 25 different schedulers, both SD and non-SD, because some of the modern schedulers, they basically solve a stochastic differential equation so that the diffusion process, the time it takes to sort of get to a good looking image, it gets reduced. It's absolutely possible. So if you want to implement your own scheduler, I highly recommend you to look through one of the scheduler implementations and take it from there. But yeah, if you have any questions, happy to take things offline if you find any bugs or implementation related questions. And then if you wanted to use that scheduler as I showed here, it will look something like this. So yeah. So let's say since scheduler, it's an inference only technique, right? So basically all the schedulers in diffusers, they are interchangeable. So if you wanted to test out your scheduler, this is how you would test it out. Cool. Now, I also wanted to, perhaps this is the final leg of my talk. I wanted to also show you how we can go about training text conditioned latent space diffusion model, because having some form of control is pretty exciting. Because it opens up doors to creative use cases and so on. So in this case, our dataset will contain image caption pairs. Again, I'm taking the Pokemon's dataset so that I can generate Sundar Pichai in cube renditions. So yeah, but there are some differences. There are some significant differences because we need ways to embed both images and text. And also we need our unit to accept both image and text embeddings for the denoising process. So let's see how. Let's step through the steps. So we have got a VA because I mentioned this is a latent space diffusion model, and we basically work on the latent space of the image. Instead of directly predicting the image in the pixel space in the first place, we basically predict their latents, and then we pass those latents to a pre-trained variational autoencoder, which is responsible for decoding the latents into an image. So basically, you are reducing the computational space to only latent space instead of directly working with the pixel space. Let's say your pixel space is 1024 by 1024, which is huge, which is computationally very expensive. And I am actually hiding the channel dimension. The actual resolution would be 1024 by 1024 by 3. But if you work on the latent space, you are basically working on a compressed representation, right? It will look something like 4 by 64 by 64 by 4, because I'm a channel's last memory layout guy. That's why I'm putting the channel on the last. So for PyTorch users, I'm sorry, it should have been 4 by 64 by 4. So yeah, minor implementation details, but they do not matter that much. But the idea is with latent space diffusion models, you are basically working with a compressed space so as to keep your computational requirements at bay. So we need a variational autoencoder to give us the latents. So we are basically predicting a distribution from which we are sampling the mu and sigma, all the cool variational autoencoder stuff. I do not need to go deep into that. And then we are sampling noise. We are basically from a Gaussian, and then we are also sampling the time steps, and then we are adding the noise to our latents. And we are using a pre-trained text encoder to compute the text embeddings, and this text encoder is actually not trained during the fine-tuning process. And then we are making our unit predict the noise that was added to our pre-computed latents, and rest of the stuff should look exactly the same. And again, this is not pseudocode. This is actual Python code, which you can go ahead and run. And yeah, voila, with 50 bucks of training, you can have cute renditions of Sundar Pichai in no time. And this is possible to run the script on a free Collab notebook. So if you are interested, please feel free to go ahead and check it out. So far we have been predicting noise, and I think we all can agree that even predicting noise can be beneficial, because we can generate cool stuff by just predicting noise. So who thought denoising autoencoders will come into the rescue again? So yeah, the unit is basically a denoising autoencoder at the best. So yeah, if you wanted to experiment with different prediction objectives, V prediction, X prediction, and so on, that's also possible. And all of our schedulers basically have an argument called prediction type, which helps us determine how to sample time steps, how to sort of basically add the noise to the latents of the images. So it's very convenient. It's again very much oriented for the practitioners. So yeah, and all the cool stuff. But I wanted to focus on qualitative validation because, like GANs, the loss landscape of diffusion models, it's not very informative. Like it's very oscillating all the time. It's not a smooth curve where gradient descent is doing its magic. It's very bumpy, and that's because we sample time steps from orders of magnitude different scales. So let's say for one epoch we have got time step 10. For another epoch, let's say we have got time step 500, and so on. So that's why the loss surface is kind of bumpy. So we cannot fully rely on on the loss landscape to make progress in the hyperparameter tuning process. We also cannot rely on metrics like Prussian inception distance, kernel inception distance, and so on, because they are very brittle. They are known to be very brittle. That's why in the diffusion literature we tend to heavily rely on qualitative validation, wherein in between certain epochs you basically take your a model which is being fine-tuned and make inference runs to generate a couple of samples and see how the training dynamics is progressing, if it's learning at all. If it's learning properly, then the quality should improve. So all of our training scripts have got qualitative validation baked inside of them, so as to give you all the firepower that you need to experiment with them as quickly as possible. And if you are concerned about computational requirements, we make every effort possible to make it as easily accessible for you, because accessibility is a first class citizen at Hugging Face. We kind of work around the clock to make that possible. So if you are restricted to consumer hardware, you do not have to worry, because we have got support to sort of to help you chug your training runs on commodity hardware. So yeah. And here are some of my favorite papers which leverage diffusers. First, we have got tuner video. Again, computationally, not a lot of expensive stuff going on. Basically, it trains the pre-trained stable diffusion model, the unit component. It introduces a new attention mechanism, and it basically lets you generate videos in interesting concepts, but you only have to fine tune on, I don't know, just 1-2 videos, and you should be well on your way. And then the second paper is all about applying reinforcement learning for better aligning generated images with text prompts, so that they kind of adheres to the text prompts better. So yeah, if you are interested, you can check out their implementations to see how diffusers is kind of leveraged for research work. And we have been talking a lot about training related stuff to get to where we want our generations to be. But it's also possible to do research on introducing improvements that are training free. And we have got pipelines for you to sort of establish that philosophy. For example, attend and excite, which basically mitigates the catastrophic neglect issue that's typically seen in diffusion models. So catastrophic neglect is the phenomenon where the underlying stable diffusion system kind of neglects some of the component objects that might be present inside your natural language prompt, and attend and excite kind of mitigates the phenomenon of catastrophic neglect. And we have got all sorts of pipelines for this, and all of them are subclass from the diffusion pipeline, so as to give you a very intuitive and unified API experience. And that's about it. So if you want to have access to the slides, feel free to scan the QR. But yeah, if you have any questions, I think I'll be around the campus for about 30 minutes or 45 minutes or so. Happy to take questions, discuss things offline. But yeah, that's about it.
Have a question,
Go ahead.
not related to here.
Yeah.
And I know, and you are working with Hugging Face, and the Hugging Face is like the open source, and everybody can download and use the package there. So I just wondering, since you spend the time to work for this code, right, and you share the code,
How we make money?
Yeah, how you make money? Yeah.
Yeah,
Around your company.
Yeah, sure. I think that's one of the questions I should prepare a slide on. But let me answer your question. Well, there are multiple sources. One is hardware partnerships. We partner with hardware providers such as AMD, Intel, and so on to work on optimized kernels so that the models that we develop run as optimally as possible on their hardware. So that's one way of our revenue stream. Then, like GitHub Pro, we have got Hugging Face Hub Pro, but it's not for version controlling code. It's for version controlling machine learning artifacts such as models, datasets, other metadata, and stuff like that. Then we have got like GitHub Enterprise, we have got Hugging Face Hub Enterprise. Again, similar offerings, not for version controlling code, but for version controlling machine learning artifacts. And then we have got inference endpoints, which basically lets you deploy large language models, basically any large machine learning model in an optimized environment. And then we have got other forms of partnerships. Let's say you go to any model homepage on the Hugging Face Hub platform, and you will see deploy to Azure endpoint. So we, partner with cloud service providers so that they can sort of chime in their hardware endpoint button, and they pay us for that. So these are some of the different revenue streams.
How big is it now?
So the entire company is 175. Yeah. The diffusers team is about eight people. Anyone else? Yeah, we do. Depends on the availability of the team and the kind of projects that we are currently working on, because we also want the interns to convert to full time, because in 90% of the cases actually interns have converted to full time. So we do take interns. Yeah, I think I can give you my email after the talk. Yeah. Go ahead.
This one is quite focused on EV generation and so on. Can you talk a little bit about other node applications for other types of data, like what is it?
Yeah, sure. I have not worked with molecule or discrete data, but I have worked with audio pipelines. So I think audio again is a very different modality, and you might think that some of the stuff might actually change quite a bit for audio, but it's actually not. As long as you can represent them as sequences, most of the stuff will look exactly the same. Like for audio, to be able to convert a mail spectrogram to actual, audio frequency stuff, you need a vocoder, but that's the only kind of different component. But rest of the stuff is exactly the same. The moment you are able to sort of faithfully represent your, audio in mail spectrograms, rest of the stuff is exactly the same.
This we have a latent space.
Yeah, exactly. All the latent space diffusion models work in the similar manner. So we have got audio pipelines like audio LDM, we have got music gen, we have got audio LDM too, and all of the stuff is basically the same, barring the audio specific stuff like vocoder. Because at the end of the day, a mail spectrogram is nothing but an image of frequencies, right? So that makes sense. Anyone else from Zoom? Any questions? Okay, cool. Cool then. I'll be around. So cool. I think we can call it a day up. We finished well before time.